There are certain names that echo through history with a darkness that time cannot erase. Salem is one of them. The word itself conjures images of courtroom accusations, gallows, and a society gripped by a feverish madness. We think we know the story, a tale of religious fanaticism and scapegoating. But the true chronicle of Salem's terror did not begin in a courtroom. It began in the quiet corners of a cold New England winter, in the whispers of frightened girls, and with a poison that may not have come from the devil, but from the very bread they ate. Our story begins in the winter of 1692, in the village of Salem, Massachusetts, a small isolated outpost of Puritan faith, surrounded by a vast and unforgiving wilderness. For these people, the world was a literal battlefield between God and Satan. They saw the dark, dense forests not as nature, but as the devil's territory, a place where he lurked with his demonic legions, waiting for any crack in their faith to seep through. Their existence was one of harsh labor, rigid prayer, and a constant, gnawing anxiety. It was in this pressure cooker of fear that two young girls, the daughter and niece of the village minister, Reverend Samuel Parris, began to behave strangely. 9-year-old Betty Parris and 11-year-old Abigail Williams started to contort their bodies into impossible shapes. They shrieked in terror at unseen specters, uttered guttural sounds, and complained of being pricked and bitten by invisible agents. The local doctor, unable to find any physical cause for their afflictions, made a diagnosis that was both medical and theological. The girls were under an evil hand. The devil had breached Salem's defenses. The question was no longer if, but how, and through whom. Under intense pressure from the village elders, the afflicted girls named their tormentors. The first three accused were not powerful figures, but women on the absolute fringes of Puritan society. A destitute, homeless woman named Sarah Good, a sickly, elderly woman named Sarah Osborne, and a figure who would become the catalyst for the entire tragedy, the Parris family's enslaved servant, a woman known to history as Tituba. Tituba's story is the key. She was not of African descent, as often portrayed, but an indigenous woman from the Caribbean, likely from Barbados, sold into slavery in Salem. She brought with her a world of folklore and belief that was utterly alien to the rigid, monochrome faith of her Puritan masters. She knew stories of spirits, magic, and divination. For the bored and repressed girls of the Parris household, Tituba's tales, told in hushed tones by the fire, were a forbidden and intoxicating escape. She had reportedly shown them a form of folk magic, dropping an egg white into a glass of water to divine the profession of their future husbands. But in this tense atmosphere, such a simple act of fortune-telling was reinterpreted as something sinister, a communion with dark forces. When accused, the two Sarahs vehemently denied the charges, but Tituba, likely under duress or torture, did something that changed everything. She confessed. And she didn't just confess, she painted a vivid, terrifying, and utterly believable portrait of the devil's conspiracy against Salem. She spoke of a tall man from Boston, dressed in black, who came to her with a book with red ink, in which she was forced to make her mark. She described riding on a broomstick, communing with animal familiars, a red cat, a black dog, and meeting with the other accused witches in a demonic pact. She gave the magistrates exactly what they wanted to hear, a detailed, lurid narrative that confirmed their deepest fears. She gave them a story, and this story, this confession, legitimized the entire hunt. It turned spectral, imagined evidence into cold, hard fact. But what truly caused the girls' initial symptoms? While psychological and social pressures were undeniably a factor, a compelling scientific theory points to a physical culprit. A tiny fungus called Claviceps purpurea, more commonly known as ergot. Ergot grows on rye, a staple grain for New England colonists. The growing season of 1691 was particularly warm and wet, perfect conditions for the fungus to thrive. When consumed, ergot fungus causes a condition called ergotism. The symptoms are terrifyingly familiar: muscle spasms, violent convulsions, vomiting, crawling sensations on the skin, and vivid hallucinations. It is, in essence, a natural form of LSD. The afflicted girls were not just imagining their torment. They may have been experiencing the horrifying physiological effects of a powerful neurotoxin. They were, in a very real sense, being poisoned. Imagine it. A small community, already primed by religious fear, begins to experience the bizarre and terrifying symptoms of mass poisoning. With no knowledge of mycology or modern medicine, they turned to the only explanation their worldview allowed: the supernatural. The poison was not in their bread, but in their souls, administered by the invisible hand of a witch. Tituba's confession, combined with the potential reality of ergot-induced hallucinations, created a perfect storm. The hysteria exploded. The circle of accusers widened, and the list of the accused grew. It was no longer just social outcasts, but respected members of the community. The spectral evidence, the testimony of an accuser that a witch's spirit had visited and tormented them, was accepted as valid in court. How could one defend against a crime that left no physical evidence, a crime that occurred in the invisible world? The answer was, you couldn't. The Salem Witch Trials were not a search for truth, but a desperate, panicked attempt to purge a community of an evil it could not understand. It was a chronicle written in fear, sealed by a slave's coerced confession, and perhaps sparked by a microscopic fungus growing on a stalk of rye. The whispers of Salem were not just those of frightened girls, but the echoes of a community losing its mind. From the collective madness of a Puritan village, we now turn our gaze to the solitary madness of a king. A man whose mind was, at one time, the most powerful political instrument in the world, and whose fracturing psyche coincided with the fracturing of an empire. He is known to American history as a tyrant, the distant villain of the Declaration of Independence. But to his own people, and to history itself, he is remembered by a more tragic, more intimate title: Mad King George. George III was not born to be a caricature. In his youth, he was known for his piety, his devotion to his wife, Queen Charlotte, and his deep interest in science and agriculture, earning him the affectionate nickname Farmer George. He ruled over a vast global empire, a network of power and commerce unparalleled in the world. But beneath this veneer of stability, a storm was gathering in the king's own mind. His first major episode occurred in 1788, years after America had won its independence. The symptoms were shocking and terrifying to a court built on decorum and order. The king would talk incessantly for hours, his voice growing hoarse, his words becoming a torrent of nonsensical, disconnected thoughts. He would foam at the mouth, his eyes would bulge, and he would descend into violent, delirious rages, even becoming physically aggressive towards his own beloved family and servants. For the physicians of the 18th century, the king's mind was a black box. The concept of mental illness as a medical condition was in its infancy. Madness was seen as a failure of character, a loss of reason, a humoral imbalance. The treatments were, therefore, not aimed at healing, but at subduing. They were brutal, based on the principle of breaking the patient's will to restore order to the mind. The royal physicians subjected their king to a litany of tortures disguised as medicine. They used blistering agent caustic plasters applied to the skin to create painful blisters, believing this would draw the evil humors out of the body. They used emetics and purgatives to induce violent vomiting and diarrhea, hoping to physically expel the madness. And they restrained him, tying him to a chair for hours on end to prevent his manic outbursts. But nothing worked. The king only grew worse. With the official court physicians failing, the desperate royal family turned to a man with a radical, controversial reputation, a former clergyman named Dr. Francis Willis. Willis ran a private asylum in Lincolnshire, and he claimed to have a high success rate in curing insanity. His methods were not based on medicine, but on a new, terrifying concept: moral management. It was a form of psychological warfare. Willis's treatment began by completely isolating the king. He was moved to a secluded lodge, his family denied access, his power as a monarch stripped away. Here, Willis was king. His core belief was that the patient's will must be broken entirely before it could be rebuilt in a rational form. He used a restraining chair as his primary tool. Anytime George showed signs of mania or disobeyed an order, he was strapped into the chair until he submitted. The doctor's gaze was his weapon. Willis and his assistants would stare at the king for long periods, an unnerving act of psychological dominance. They controlled his every action: when he ate, when he slept, what he said. If the king spoke of his delusions, he was punished. If he behaved rationally, he was rewarded. It was an early, crude form of behavioral therapy, wielded with the subtlety of a blacksmith's hammer. So what was truly afflicting the king? For centuries, the simple diagnosis was madness. But modern medical historians, examining detailed contemporary accounts of his symptoms, have proposed a compelling theory: porphyria. Porphyria is a rare, genetic blood disorder that affects the production of heme, a vital component of hemoglobin. A buildup of the chemicals called porphyrins can cause a devastating range of symptoms, including abdominal pain, blistering skin, muscle weakness, and severe neurological and psychiatric episodes, anxiety, paranoia, hallucinations, and delirium. One of the telltale signs of an acute porphyria attack is urine that turns a dark reddish-purple color. And contemporary accounts, hidden away for centuries, noted that during his worst episodes, King George's urine was indeed the color of dark wine. More recent theories suggest he may have suffered from a severe form of bipolar disorder, which would also account for his cycles of deep depression followed by frenetic, weeks-long manic episodes. Some historians have even found evidence of high levels of arsenic in samples of the king's hair. Arsenic, a potent poison, was a common ingredient in the cosmetics and medicines of the time. Chronic arsenic poisoning can also lead to madness. The tragedy is that the king's cures may have been feeding his disease. Regardless of the cause, for King George III, the experience was a living hell. Stripped of his crown, his family, and his dignity, he was a prisoner in his own mind and a subject of his doctor's cruel experiments. He would eventually recover from this first episode, returning to the throne to the adulation of his people. But the madness would return, each time more severe, until in the final decade of his life, he was left a blind, deaf, and truly broken man, wandering the halls of Windsor Castle, playing his harpsichord and conversing with angels. The story of Mad King George is not just about a monarch's personal tragedy. It is a chronicle of the brutal dawn of psychiatry, a testament to how little we understood the delicate chemistry of the human brain. The most powerful man on earth was ultimately powerless against the mysterious forces raging within his own skull, a king dethroned not by revolution, but by a rebellion in his own blood and nerves. From the gilded cage of a king's mind, our journey now leads us to a different kind of prison, a place of beauty and tranquility, where life flourishes in vibrant color. But this beauty is a facade, for here, every leaf, every berry, every root holds a secret knowledge, as old as humanity itself, the knowledge of how to kill, silently and without a trace. We are entering the world of poison. In the north of England stands Alnwick Castle. To many, it is famous as a filming location for a school of wizardry. But hidden within its grounds lies a place far more real and far more dangerous, the Alnwick Poison Garden. Created at the turn of our own century, it is a living museum of lethality. Behind these black iron gates grow over 100 species of the world's most toxic and intoxicating plants. This garden is a modern concept, but it is a gateway to an ancient, forgotten world of knowledge. A world where botany was not just the science of life, but the art of death. Let us begin with one of the garden's most infamous residents, Atropa belladonna, more commonly known as deadly nightshade. The name itself is a chronicle. Atropos was one of the three fates in Greek mythology, the one who cut the thread of life. Belladonna is Italian for beautiful woman. Renaissance women would use drops from the berry to dilate their pupils, believing it made them more seductive and alluring. They were sacrificing clear vision for the sake of beauty, using a poison as a cosmetic. But its beauty hides a terrifying power. Every part of the plant is rich in alkaloids that shut down the body's nervous system. A handful of berries is enough to cause delirium, hallucinations, and ultimately, respiratory failure. The Roman Empress Livia was rumored to have used it to assassinate her husband, the Emperor Augustus, smearing a potent extract on the figs he loved to pick from his garden. It was the perfect murder weapon, subtle, hard to trace, and disguised as an act of nature. The line between medicine, poison, and magic has always been perilously thin. Consider the mandrake, or Mandragora officinarum. Its root, forked and gnarled, bears an uncanny resemblance to a human figure. This resemblance gave birth to a powerful myth. It was believed that when a mandrake was pulled from the ground, it would let out a scream so piercing it would kill anyone who heard it. To harvest it safely, practitioners of folk magic developed an elaborate ritual. They would tie a rope from the plant to a dog, plug their own ears with wax, and then tempt the dog with meat from a distance. The dog, lunging for the meat, would pull the root from the ground, hear its fatal scream, and die in the harvester's place. This myth, while fantastic, served a practical purpose. It made the plant incredibly rare and valuable, protecting the secret knowledge of those who knew how to use it. And its use was profound. In controlled, tiny doses, the same alkaloids that made it a poison also made it a powerful anesthetic. It was a key ingredient in the spongia somnifera, or soporific sponge, used by medieval surgeons. A sponge was soaked in a mixture of mandrake, opium, and henbane, and held over the patient's nose and mouth. The fumes would induce a deep, trance-like state, allowing for amputations and other brutal procedures that would be impossible on a conscious patient. The very same plant that could kill with its scream could also grant the mercy of oblivion. But perhaps no plant in this deadly garden represents the duality of knowledge better than the humble castor bean, Ricinus communis. The plant itself is beautiful, with large, star-shaped leaves. Its seeds are speckled and look like small, polished beetles. But within these seeds lies one of the most potent natural toxins on Earth, ricin. Ricin is a cytotoxin. It works on a cellular level, invading the body's cells and shutting down their ability to produce the proteins they need to live. The process is slow, agonizing, and irreversible. There is no antidote. It is a poison of terrifying efficiency, and it became a weapon of choice in the shadowy world of Cold War espionage. In 1978, a Bulgarian dissident writer named Georgy Markov was waiting for a bus on Waterloo Bridge in London. He felt a sharp sting in his thigh. He turned to see a man pick up an umbrella and quickly disappear into the crowd. Markov died in a hospital 4 days later. During the autopsy, pathologists found a tiny, pinhead-sized metal pellet embedded in his leg. The pellet had been drilled with 2 minuscule holes and filled with a dose of ricin. It had been fired from a specially designed umbrella, a covert weapon wielded by the KGB. The forgotten knowledge of an ancient plant had been weaponized for the modern age. The poison garden is more than a collection of dangerous plants. It is a living archive of human intention. It reminds us that knowledge itself is neutral. The same plant that can heal a wound can also stop a heart. The same compound that can grant a merciful sleep can be used to silence a political enemy. This forgotten botany is a chronicle of our species' endless search for power. Power over nature, power over life, and ultimately, power over each other. The secrets are not locked in ancient texts or hidden in vaults. They are growing quietly all around us, their roots deep in the dark soil of history. From the silent poisons of the natural world, we now enter the most secret garden of all, the human mind. Our final chronicle is not about a forgotten past, but a deliberately concealed one. A history that was classified, burned, and denied for decades. This is the story of a time when a new kind of war began, a silent, psychological war, where the battlefield was human consciousness itself, and the grand prize was the ability to control it. This is the story of the CIA's first, desperate hunt for the secrets of mind control. The The year is 1950. The Cold War is no longer cold. It is freezing. The United States is reeling from the loss of China to communism and the Soviet Union's successful detonation of an atomic bomb. A new kind of fear grips the nation, the fear of brainwashing. American prisoners of war returning from Korea were giving shocking, robotic confessions, denouncing their own country. The press spoke of a terrifying new communist weapon, one that could erase a man's personality and replace it with a new one. Within the nascent Central Intelligence Agency, this fear bred a desperate question. If they can do it, why can't we? And more importantly, can we do it better? This question gave birth to a highly classified, deeply unethical program, the forgotten predecessor to the infamous MK Ultra. Its first codename was Project Bluebird. Project Bluebird's objective was chillingly direct: to discover a means of controlling an individual to the point where they would carry out actions against their will, and even against fundamental laws of nature, such as self-preservation. They wanted to know, can we create a Manchurian candidate, a programmed assassin or courier who would have no memory of their mission? The agency enlisted psychiatrists, neurosurgeons, and former Nazi scientists brought to the U.S. under Operation Paperclip. Their laboratories were not gleaming halls of science, but black sites, secret detention facilities in the US, Europe, and Asia. And their test subjects were not volunteers. They were people deemed expendable: prisoners, defectors, mental patients, and suspected enemy agents. People whose disappearance would go unnoticed. The primary tool of Project Bluebird, which was soon renamed Project Artichoke, was hypnosis. CIA hypnotists believed they could create multiple, distinct personalities within a single person. The mission personality could be activated by a code word, carry out an act, and then be put back to sleep, leaving the original personality with no memory of what had happened, only a period of lost time. Declassified documents describe horrifying experiments. In one, 2 female subjects were hypnotized and put into a deep trance. One was told to attack the other, who would not wake up no matter what. The first subject proceeded to choke the second with such violence that the experimenters had to physically intervene to stop her from committing murder. The experiment was deemed a success. They had bypassed the conscious mind's moral objections. But hypnosis was not reliable enough. The agency needed to make the mind more pliable, more open to suggestion. They turned to pharmacology. They experimented with a cocktail of drugs, combining sedatives like Seconal with stimulants like Benzedrine to create a state of artificial delirium. But their holy grail was a substance they believed could unlock any secret: lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD. Under Operation Artichoke, the CIA became the first major institutional sponsor of LSD research in the United States. They administered the drug to their subjects, often without their knowledge, to see if it would break down their resistance to interrogation. Agents would dose their own colleagues at office parties to observe the effects. They set up brothels in New York and San Francisco, codenamed Operation Midnight Climax, where unsuspecting men were lured, given LSD-laced drinks, and then observed from behind 2-way mirrors as they lost their grip on reality. The goal was always control. Could they use LSD to create false memories? Could they erase real ones? Could they program a person under its influence? The declassified records are filled with cold, bureaucratic language describing immense human suffering. One document chillingly concludes that LSD is too unpredictable for interrogation, but notes its potential for discrediting individuals through aberrant behavior. They couldn't get secrets out, but they could drive people mad. Narrator: this secret war for the mind culminated in the death of one of their own. Dr. Frank Olson was an army biochemist working on the CIA's biological weapons program. In 1953, at a secret agency retreat, he was unwittingly dosed with LSD in his cocktail. 9 days later, after suffering a severe psychotic breakdown, Frank Olson fell to his death from the window of his 10th floor hotel room in New York City. His death was ruled a suicide. For decades, his family was told it was a tragic accident. The truth was far more sinister. He was a casualty of a war he didn't even know he was fighting. The early days of the CIA's mind control programs were not a story of brilliant, malevolent super spies. They were a chronicle of paranoia, desperation, and a profound ethical void. It was a period where the fear of an external enemy led men to commit monstrous acts in the name of national security. They sought to understand the mind, not to heal it, but to break it. They pursued a forbidden knowledge, and in doing so, they created a darkness that has haunted the corridors of power ever since. The bluebird was not a symbol of hope, but a harbinger of a new kind of terror that sought to conquer the last free territory on Earth, the human soul.